Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lori Rubin, and we're very excited to have Don Smith with us today. He's going to be presenting Fixing Low Light Landscape Photos with DxO PhotoLab 4 and the Nik Collection 3 by DxO. And he's been a professional landscape sports photographer for many years now. He's also a Sony artisan and a Stingray ambassador. So he's had an extensive background in professional sports photography. And for the last 14 years, he's been running workshops, landscape workshops, and his images are just beautiful. So if you want to see more about Don's workshops, I'll go ahead and tell you what his website is. It's donsmithphotography.com. You can go ahead and check that out after the webinar and maybe join a workshop or two with him. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Don. And Don, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun. So, hi everyone. I know some of you out there because you've been writing me on my social media when I've been putting the links up for this webinar, and I know some of my colleagues are out there, and they're going to see if I slip up here so they can call me as soon as this is over and you know, give me the needle. As Lori said, my background, I actually started out in the newspaper business. And I just discovered I had a knack at shooting sports. But all along, when I picked up my first camera, I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school. I remember I had my parents bought me a Minolta ST-101, for those of you old enough in the audience to remember that. And it was a basic film camera, but it was awesome. And I lived out here by the Monterey Bay in California, and it's just a beautiful area. And we've had, you know, some of the greats live out here. Ansel Adams, Kim Weston still lives over here. John Sexton. These are some of just the people I was inspired by growing up. But I really kind of merged my love of sports with photography as I got into college. I went to San Jose State and kind of figured out I didn't really want to work at a newspaper, but I did when I came out of college. I worked at some of the local newspapers in our area called the McClatchy chain. And because I had this knack at sports, they'd give me all the sports assignments to do. But my fun stuff was always running around shooting landscapes, never intending to do it for a living. My goal was to go to work for Sports Illustrated, and that happened back in the late 80s, early 90s for about 7 years. I was never a staffer, but I was a what they call a stringer, and they would throw a lot of assignments my way. And actually, I think one of the gentlemen that are in the audience today, where his name's Ron Madra, and Ron, you're out there. Ron was a big inspiration and still is to this day, and Ron actually works helping teach my workshops now. He's just a tremendous artist. And so I've gotten to work around, you know, some of the best people in this industry in both landscape and sports photography. And I want to give you just a little bit of how I think about photos and processing before we dive in and work on these shots you're seeing here. I was telling Lori before we went live that I was at a Sony event over in Monterey, California 2 years ago, and a bunch of us artisans, there must have been about 20 of us, were sitting around over a few beers, and we were discussing how much is really done creatively out in the field versus how much is done when we bring it into process. And obviously back in the film days when we were shooting chrome, when I worked at the magazine at Sports Illustrated, it was all chrome. And we had a wiggle room of maybe a third to a half a stop over or underexposed. So now we're in the digital realm where histograms are up and it's like your exposure coach, and it's just taken all that pressure off of me. But what we came to the general consensus, these 20 artisans, is that we felt almost to a person that 50% of your creativity is done in the field and 50% is done representing what you want to have that final image look like. And especially for me in the landscape realm, maybe not so much in other genres. I can't speak that much. I'm really into doing the landscape. And by the way, I worked with the San Jose Sharks for 28 years as a co-team photographer, and I left 2 years ago to devote all my time to teaching workshops. And hopefully with the vaccines coming up and we can get out of this COVID, we're going to get going again. So I am what you would call kind of a seat of the pants editor or processor. I know when I teach my workshops, a lot of my clients will come in and think it's, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F. If I just do these steps, I will get a perfect picture every time. And you don't. Every picture, especially in landscape, is going to need some analysis. There is some processing, obviously, that goes on with a raw file. I think most of you know that. But it's not like a processed JPEG that you see coming up on the back of your LCD screen. So I think the first thing people freak out about when they're shooting in RAW is they see that nice processed JPEG pop up on the back of their LCD screen. Then they come into a computer, into a program like PhotoLab, and the picture looks kind of flat, kind of like what you're seeing up on the screen here with this moon coming over these oaks. And so there has to be some processing on our end. And I usually work, there is a foundation I work with. And I'm going to work in today, we're going to work in this box, which is your tones, which are down in here. Then we're going to work over here a little bit in color. And not on this first shot, but virtually every shot thereafter, we're going to go in, and this is huge to me, DeepPRIME. I got with PhotoLab when they very first came out, and I just thought they were the best noise reduction software company on the market, and I still think that. And with DeepPRIME, I don't know what these guys are doing with their algorithms, but they are reducing noise and keeping the sharpness of the image. And the last image I show you today, which is going to be, this is going to be my kind of gotcha one, and I'll explain it when we get there. We're going to work from right to left, and you'll kind of see my process. So if I pause a little bit during this, it's because I've done some dry run-throughs, yeah, but I don't want to be 100% prepared, because every time I sit down to process a picture, my mood will affect how I see that picture. Relationships. Do I have music on in the background? I don't today doing this webinar, so I'll spare you my playlist. But anything that can put you into a creative state when you're editing, I like to be very quiet, music going lightly in the background. That puts me into kind of my creative state. So having said that, let's get going. Let's get going with these images, and I'll kind of show you how we go about doing this. So this was at Moonrise. This shot was captured about 20 minutes where I live. The thing about COVID, it's forced us all to kind of stay in our own areas. I have been traveling probably more than I should have, but the workshops haven't been running. So I've been getting out still 3-4 days a week shooting, self-assignments. And this was a picture, I plotted this on software, the photographer's ephemeris, when this moon would get up over this hillside of oaks that I happen to like. So what I want to do is, like I said, I come into my tonality first. And I think it's very important, follow my cursor over here to the left, that you have a histogram up at all times, not only when you're shooting in the field, but when you're processing. And the beauty of this histogram inside of PhotoLab is if I click on this is going to show me if I'm clipping shadows. So let's come over to our shadows here. And you can see when the blue starts to come in, I am clipping, okay? So I'm going to reset that shadow. And conversely, because it's a moon, I don't want to blow that moon out. So if I took my highlights, you can start to see the blue overlay coming in, and I'm starting to clip a channel, one or more channels. So that I have to be very careful of. It's very important that you have a calibrated monitor when you are editing, and you keep a good eye on your highlights and blacks and have a histogram up. And the reason for that is when you go out to print, and I use an online service, I've used them for years, called Bay PhotoLab. They're based out here near Santa Cruz, California. I was going to them when they were just a physical walk-in store. That's how long I've been with them. But everything they print is going to be in sRGB mode, and I've talked to their top processors. And if you have your highlights and your blacks set correctly with no clipping, you're going to get a great print back every time, assuming too that you have a calibrated monitor. Okay, so having said all that, what I would like to do is just, you know, I'm gonna start to just pull my highlights over. And it doesn't matter if you work with blacks or highlights first, it really doesn't. And right there, you're seeing all the color go away in the moon. I know I've set a white point. It's that simple. Now I'm gonna come down here. I wanna open up the blacks, but I don't wanna open them up too much. This is more natural to what my eyes saw. This is why I never got into HDR photography that much. I dabbled in it. It just looked unnatural. It changed the lighting too much from what our eye really sees in the field. That's about all I want to do in this module. I want to come over to the color module, and I just want to warm this up just a smidgen, okay? And I'm not going to make huge temperature swings one way or the other. You'll see me do this a little bit more when I get into the night work, but I think that's where I want to go. Now, this shot, I'm starting kind of easy. This was only at an ISO of 160, so there's not going to be a lot of noise in the shot. I shot this with a Sony a7R IV, but what I want to do is, this is where my Nik collection comes in, and I've been with Nik. I've known Lori now, I think, for 14 years, back when they were in San Diego. And what I want to do is come into Color Efex Pro. So I kind of know these filters and my go-to filters and where I want to go on certain things. And really, as this is opening up, you guys, that's so key with processing. It's like anything else. You want to become a good golfer, get out and practice. If you want to become a good piano player, you got to put in the time to practice. You want to become good at processing, you've got to put in the time to process. So what I want to do here is I want to come in and add a little bit of brilliance and warmth. And by default, we're at neutral. I'm going to just go to increase saturation. And I don't hesitate to just cycle through these because you can do these on the fly. What I'm looking for, honestly, is to get a little more of these pinks popping up in here. And there's the warm colors. That, to me, feels about right. Now, the shot looks a little flat, so I'm going to come back to another one of my favorites, which is Pro Contrast. And I'm just going to go to neutral. I think Auto Enhance is going to wipe me out. Yes, it does. So I'm just going to come on over to Correct Contrast. I'm just going to start tugging a little. And where my eye is going is just, I don't want to blow that moon out like that. I want to keep the detail in the moon, but I'm just, what you saw in just 3 percentage points is I bumped a little bit of contrast down into these trees, okay? So I'm not gonna actually save this one out because it's gonna take too much time if I go in. Certain ones I will, but not this one. Okay, and when I go back to my screen, I apologize. You're going to see it go back to the home screen there. For some reason, it's the settings we've had to put in to make this webinar work that I have to go and bring back PhotoLab like this. Okay, so let's move along. This is the Neowise comet. This was, well, we can hover over that and let that come up, or I can point it out over here. This was captured with an a7R IV. This is, if you're familiar with California at all, we are looking, Santa Cruz would be under these lights right up in here, and these bright lights over in here are downtown San Jose. I'm up on a road called San Juan Grade Road. It's out of a little mission town called San Juan Bautista, California, and it really gets you up about 3,000 feet. I'm at about 2,000 for this image, and it puts you over. This is all this out here is summer fog coming in. We shot this on July 17th when Neowise was becoming very prominent in the night sky. So if you look over here, here's my settings. I was wide open. I was using a 24-105 Sony lens, wide open at f4, 20 seconds, and I'm going to talk about that in a sec, and 1600 ISO. I know my camera so well that with the A7R4, anything I do that goes about 640 ISO or higher, I'm taking it in. My first thought is always go in and do DeepPRIME. So I'm going to click over here. And the reason I'm doing this, and what I want to do is just click this little box and get you up so we can see up near Neowise, okay? And it happens very, very quickly. So, and the reason I'm doing it on the front end, because when I go into the Nik filters to process, they're going to want to export as a TIFF, and then I won't have access to DeepPRIME if they export as a TIFF. So I hope that makes sense. So what I want to do now is I'm going to just go through and check on my highlights, which are looking pretty good. Let's click on here and see. I think I can actually bump the highlights up just a smidgen. Okay, just bring out those stars a little bit more. And my shadows, actually I got detail down the shadow. This Sony A7R4 is just an incredible camera. Okay, so I want to, before I move on and process this, I told you about the little bit of streaking in the stars at 20 seconds. And there's a rule that permeates out there on the web called the 500 rule. And what it is for you night photographers, supposedly if you take your focal length and you divide it into 25, my focal length here was 54 millimeters, and you divide it into 500, excuse me, so that, you know, I should not go more than what, about 10 seconds. I'm not a mathematician, so don't hold me to this, before you start seeing streaking in the stars. And there is a little bit of streaking in the stars going on up there, but you know what? Here's the deal. It really doesn't affect me all that much if there's some streaking in the stars. And by the way, I'm opening up Viveza too while I'm talking, because we're going to go in here and work on this shot in Viveza. So I tell people in my workshops, and I would really impress it upon you, get the exposure right out in the field. That's what's key. If you're trying to get these stars to freeze, but your picture is so underexposed that it gets noisy and grainy, what's the point? You've blown the picture, right? So exposure in the field is very critical. You got to get it right. And if that means you're dialing up ISOs, I'm going to show you something here that's going to blow your socks off as we move through. But you know, you get the ISO up where it needs to be. So the first thing I do when I'm working on any night shot is I want to bump some global contrast into the scene. And as I do that, two things are happening. You're seeing the sky darken down. Well, really three things are happening. You're seeing the sky darken down now to a more natural night. And let's just do a little before and after here. You can see what's going on. The saturation on the horizon, this was in the summertime, and we were probably an hour past sunset. And I know there can still be with, you know, nautical twilight, you can have glow out on the horizon for, boy, at that time of year, at least 2 hours after sunset. And what it does also is it makes the picture overall appear to be sharper. So that's all a good thing. Now, I'm going to take a breath, like I said, and I want to look at this picture. And you make a move, and the way I work, then you do an analysis. And I like everything that's going on in this picture, other than I'm a real nut for on the edge bright spots. There's bright over here from the lights of San Jose, and there's brights over here. That is probably the lights of Salinas, California, under the fog bank there. So how do I deal with that? Well, this is where I'm going to come in. And this is what sold me on Viveza way back when it first came out. This is luminosity masking on steroids. Luminosity masking made very simple. You just drop a control point, and I'm going to take the brightness down just a bit. Now, I'm not looking at numbers. My eye is looking at the left side of that frame. And I'm going to click out of there. That looks about right. I'm going to click another one now to deal with this. And you can see I really work my my circles down to just get it into the area that I want to work on. And I'm going to take that brightness down. And I'm gonna go a little bit more, not too much, because we need to have the transition here look natural. I think I can work this one down now, even a little bit more. I might even try, let's just try saturation just to see what that would do. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Don't be afraid of trying things. Like I said, there's not a magic formula. You figure out what the image needs and you go after it. And now that I'm looking, one more control point can be added right there. I'm going to take those lights of San Juan Bautista, the little mission town. I'm going to take those down a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to do a stacked view. This is what we started with in the raw file, and a few simple tweaks in PhotoLab, and then moving it over to Viveza, we've come up with that. Okay, so I would be ready to send this image out to my stock agency, Getty Images. I would feel really good about that. I would convert it to an 8-bit before I send it out. So, you know, it's that easy. Okay, let's move along. Now let's start ramping up the difficulty a little bit here. This is a shot that I did down along the Big Sur coast back in June with a friend of mine, Mike Hall. And this image was captured at about 3:30 in the morning. And you ask yourself, well, why would you go out there and shoot this shot at that time? Well, this was the time that the Milky Way was going to line up over McWay Falls. So it was go time. So I'm going to just do a little bit in PhotoLab, not a lot. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let my eye, let me reset this because I don't want to get out ahead of you guys. I don't want to look at the shadows down here. I know I have some wiggle room down in those shadows. If I open that up, I can see there's wiggle room down there. Let me first go over and put in DeepPRIME. Okay. I hope I don't skip this step. Sometimes I get going and I forget to do it. And that's going to take care of a lot of any of the noise. This was captured with an original Sony A7S. I now own the Sony A7S III. The A7S is a 5+ year old camera. So I'm going to let my eye, I tend to divide the scene up. And I'm going to let my eye on this first move just come in on the sky area up here. And I want to tone that down a little bit right there. I think the color temperature, we have an abundance of green in here, and I'm going to show you a cool little trick on how I can dial that out. Let's go into the Nik filters, and I want to go into Color Efex Pro 4, and we'll let that reopen on the screen. And the reason you're seeing this green in the shot, it's been explained to me by people far smarter than me, it's a little bit like the Northern Lights, and I actually have a Northern Lights image here I'm going to show you. And it's our eyes cannot see this, but these cameras are accumulating photons in the field, and this is the beauty of night photography. It's insanely wild as to what your eye can see versus what the camera can see. So I'm in Color Efex, and to get this greenish out, Nik makes it very easy because they give you this remove color cast, right? So I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to click on green, and it's not taking it out enough, but remember I said you cycle through. That's a little too warm for me. There we go. Blue is starting to look just about right. The first two up here are red and yellow, look a little too green, and if I went over to magenta, that's warming it too much. So voila, and I can control the strength and the color over here. But I'm just getting started, so I kind of like this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save this out. Excuse me. Again, this will not happen, you guys, if you had your normal monitor settings in. It's just because of the webinar that this is doing this. And I'm going to open up now. I want to come back into, let's go back into Viveza. And we're going to have to use unique names, and that's because I've already outputted one TIFF, so that's not a big deal. Okay, and I'm going to make sure I'm on the corrected shot. That's important, that you're not on the raw shot, that you come back out to the corrected shot. And you know what? I think it was, yeah, I made the mistake. I'm going to go back out. Let me get out of Viveza really quickly, because what I did is I accidentally clicked onto the raw picture, and I meant to click onto the corrected TIFF. And now we open up Viveza. Okay, and this should open up a little faster because it's a TIFF file. Okay, let me get back into single mode now. So we've pretty much dealt with that green color cast, but this picture needs a lot of work. And this is really where I feel that these control points come in to help me out. Instead of bumping up the overall contrast, the global contrast, this would make my shadows down here almost too hard to work with. So I'm not going to go that route. I'm going to go with a control point, and I'm going to drop, and I'm going to size down about 4 control points into the Milky Way. And I'm going to bump that up. And I'm going to just, I'm on a Mac, so you Option or Alt click, and you drag this up. Okay. And I'm just going to draw a square around all of these to group them. And now I can bring the contrast up. When I bring it up on one, it's going to bring it up on all of them. I don't want to go too over the top. I don't want to make the Milky Way like bam and make it look, you know, like, wow, there's all the contrast and there's not in here. Okay, so now I'm kind of liking what's going on up in the top half of the picture, but we need to work now. Remember I said we were going to break this picture into 2 parts. We need to come down here, and we need, I already know because I checked. Remember, we checked before we started working on this picture. Let's see how good DeepPRIME did here. We're going to brighten up McWay Fall and McWay Cove. This is, by the way, the only freshwater fall in the entire 90 miles of the Big Sur coast, and it goes year-round. It feeds from mountain peaks in the Santa Lucia, about 5,000 feet up. This turquoise you're seeing out in this cove, that's natural. You would see that if you came out during the middle of the day or on the edges of the day, and I've shot down here a bunch, but never at 3:30 in the morning. So I'm going to drop one more control point back in here into the mountains, just to see if we can pull, let me size it about there. I just want to see if I can pull a little bit of detail. I don't want to go too much. I don't want to like bang, take it over the top and turn it into daytime, because this is a night shot. But now let's see the before and after. This is the one that just, one of the two that really blew me away when I started working on this. Look at that. And that's just, contrast is your best friend in processing. It really is, because it saturates colors, it sharpens edges to give an illusion of a sharper image. You know, that all came from Picasso. If you studied his work from his early years to his late years, he because he was losing his sight, and back then they couldn't do anything about it, so he started drawing with bolder paint brushes. And I saw an exhibit of his in Venice, my wife and I, where it went in chronological order, and you could actually see it when you came around to his latest work. And it's kind of that same principle as applied here. If we make the transition between blacks and white pixels broader, it brings out the illusion of sharpness. Okay, so that's how I go about processing that one. Let's bring back up PhotoLab here, and let's move along. We're going to come into another Milky Way shot, and this one I captured back in January. You can see January 2nd, and it 1:21 a.m. So it wasn't really as wild as the 3:30 a.m. I don't think I got home on that other shot, the one I just showed you, as the sun was rising. So here's another Milky Way shot. I don't want to go through everything on the processing, because I just showed you that before, so we'd be repeating ourselves. But as DeepPRIME is working, I want you to come over here and take a look. This was shot at 12,800 ISO on the original Sony a7S camera. Again, camera that's 5.5 years old. The new Sony a7S III, by the way, I'll save it for the next frame because I'll blow you away. But 12,800 looks clean on the new Sony a7S III. So a few things that I would work on here. I would probably go in. This looks a little, you notice the other one looked a little too green. Well, this one looks a little too red. So even your nighttime images can change a little. Now, I don't want to cool it down to where I go to blue. This is an old cinematic trick. They would shoot nighttime stuff in day, and then they would cool the sky off to blue. And I'm almost getting into purple there. I don't want to go down in there. So this is, again, it has to be what resonates with you. I may want to back off the magenta. There seems to be a heavy magenta cast in there. And there you go. I would fix up this Milky Way the same way, where I'd go into Viveza and drop those 4 points in there and bring that out. But there's something else I want to show you that's pretty cool. This is Highway 1. This is the famous Bixby Bridge. I'm sure all of you have seen it in millions of commercials. It's been in movies. It's pretty famous. Well, I was shooting this 10 seconds. This is a 12mm lens. I shot this with the new Sony 12 to 24 f2.8 lens. And you see I got some perspective problems over here. This headlight, this is what we call Hurricane Point. This is Highway 1, a car coming around the turn. And the reason I got that beam of light is because there was a little bit of mist starting to come up off the ocean here. To my eye, I couldn't see any of this, you guys. This was just black down in here along the coastline. When you're doing night photography in Milky Way, you have to check and see when the moon is rising. And I think on this morning, the moon wasn't going to rise till 3 a.m. And you can see I'm shooting this at, what did I say, 1:21 in the morning. I think I stayed out there till about 2 a.m. working this scene. And then I said, I got it. And the moon's going to start rising from the left over here. And then it's going to wash out the Milky Way. So you have to be very careful. Let me go back into the Nik Collection, though. We're going to go into perspective effects. As a friend of mine once said, I am, this could be a train wreck or this could be really good. And one of the things I've learned with this tool is you have to open up your original raw file. So we're going to go get it, and I think it has something to do with the mapping back to the original. That's the raw file, so I'm going to open that so it has the data to work with. Now, I'm going to come up here just to the very first little module that says volume deformation. I have no idea what that means, but check this out. When I click on this horizontal vertical box, put your eye down, and we'll show the before and after, but keep your eye on the Bixby Bridge. And look at that. We're going to go into the split mode here. So here was the original, okay? And here is the corrected view of it. All right, now we could make a point that it altered a little bit of the sky, but I don't know about you guys. I would rather, I would rather have the bridge like this and not looking skewed like it's gonna fall over like that. And the reason it looks that way is because I'm right up against the bridge with a 12mm, and kind of angling up towards the sky. So it's perspective distortion. And the red that's on this bridge is a car that came past us, and the tail lights are warming up the bridge. I love doing night photography. So there's the corrected view, there's the original view, and the corrected view. That's so cool that I was able to do that in one click. I haven't been in to play with this filter very much, but I can tell you after messing around with this, I am definitely going to come in and play with this a lot more. We're not going to save it. We're going to say don't save. Here's the one I wanted to show you. This isn't going to be a shot we're going to work on. But for those of you who are thinking about buying the new Sony a7S III, you're looking at the shot and you're probably going, Don, you've lost your mind. What the heck are you talking about? Well, let me tell you what the ISO was on this, and then tell me if I lost my mind. 204,500 ISO. The reason I can't show you the raw file is because DxO has not yet written the profile for the new Sony a7S III camera. It'll be coming out. I happen to think that DxO writes the best profiles in the industry. And I know I'll get an argument from some people on that. I'm sorry, I've been with this software for such a long time. When these guys do come out with their profile, it's going to be stellar. And then I want to go in and see what DeepPRIME, because I had to convert this to a TIFF. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to get over to Prime or DeepPRIME. And but the minute I actually come in my office every day that I'm home and not traveling, and I purposely open up PhotoLab 4 just to see if, hey, you got an update, because it should be coming out pretty darn quick. The reason I'm getting so excited about this, you guys, I started back in the day where I started on Kodachrome 25 film. And when we went to Kodachrome 64, that was huge, right? I bumped up a stop and a third. And then we got, wow, Kodachrome 200, and we could push process it to Kodachrome 400. We're talking almost 250,000 ISO here. And look at this. Look at how sharp this lettering is. And I know I could get in here and I could control this. I think you already seen I've taken my highlights down on it. But boy, as soon as that profile comes out, I got to believe it's going to really clear up this noise. This camera, you know, like we said, 50% on the front end. If you're working with the latest technology, and then you come in on the back end on a program as sophisticated as PhotoLab 4 and the algorithms these guys are developing, it's just off the charts what's going on. They're making our life as photographers just exciting, because we can capture stuff we could never dream of before. All right, two more. Let's move along. This is the Northern Lights in Iceland. This is a workshop. Unfortunately, we're going to have to postpone. It was going to be next month that we were going to be going over. So this was last January. If you've never been over on the Northern Lights, we just added a workshop, and you can check that out. I don't have the dates here in front of me, but it's on my website. The first workshop is going to be the one we had to cancel this year, and then we're going to stay over and we're going to rerun it with a whole new group of people. It's a 10-day workshop. We can't guarantee you we'll get you the Northern Lights, but I've been over there 3 times now, and I've never not gotten the Northern Lights. And it's actually fairly comfortable. We're out about, this says 3:15 p.m. because I didn't set my time. This was about midnight we were out, and you're thinking, Iceland, January, midnight, are you nuts? This is when you get the best shot at the Northern Lights, is in the wintertime. And it has to do with solar flares coming off the sun. And it takes about 4 days for it to travel down Iceland. There's apps that we have that can actually predict when it'll be there. And we have a professional photographer who lives in Iceland who runs the tour for us. And it is, if you've never seen the Northern Lights, it'll send chills down your spine to see it. So let's take a look at what we could do here. There's not a whole lot I really want to do. I want to just jump right into Viveza. Okay, and as it's opening, by the way, one of my favorite Nik filters, and I was telling Lori this before we started, is silver effects. But for this presentation of being low light, there's not really anything I would try in black and white. It just wouldn't resonate with me. I think of black and white more as a daytime type venture. When the light is bad for color, it's good for black and white. But so the analysis phase for me is this. There's some highlights here. They're very subtle, right down in here and here, that I want to kind of get under control a little bit more. So I'm going to put small little control points, and I'm just going to knock the brightness down a tinge. I don't want to kill it. I just want to, I don't want the eye, you know, the eye is going to always gravitate to the brightest tone in your scene. And you can see that the first 3 are all pretty uniform, but here I don't want to group these because I want to have the ability to deal with each of these individually. And I think that's it on the highlights I want to do. So I always click out to get those little stems to go away. Now, this is actually a photographer. I don't know if he was part of our group. There was a lot of groups out there this night who walked out, and during this exposure, it's actually picking out the beam of his flashlight. I think in final analysis, I would take the clone tool in PhotoLab and take that right out. But what I want to do down here is I'm looking at the dark parts, because you can see it's the majority of this is about the northern lights, and they're incredible. But I want to open up this mountain range, and this is actually a very steep mountain range. Now, when I place my circle here where I'm going to tell the Viveza where I want to open, notice I'm keeping it off the left edge. And that's because I don't want this getting really bright over here and tugging the eye out. Okay, remember the Neowise shot I showed you. Let's keep the brights off the edge. I call those eye leaks, and I don't want my viewer's eye going out. And it's just very subtle. I don't want to lose the illusion of night. Hold on a second here. I'm going to pick up, I'm going to hold down the Option or Alt key as I move these along. And let's click out of these. And I think what I'll do is I'll select all of these and we'll just brighten them up uniformly. Too much. Let me back it down a little. It's very subtle, these moves, you guys. Don't go crazy on your moves, but don't be afraid also to tug a slider if you don't know what's going on with it. So this was more of a subtle type of thing, but I mean, you can see where there's the before where the eye's going to want to jump up in here to me because there's brighter points up in here, brighter light, and it pulls it off. And what I'm trying to tell my viewer is, hey, there's a lot of beauty in this mountain range down here. It's about I don't know, it's got to be at least a 5,000 or 6,000 foot mountain range. I know it looks small in this picture relatively, but isn't that cool? So, all right, let me cancel out of this, and I'm going to go to the showstopper here that I really want to show you guys. And this is the last one, and then we'll open it up for questions. This was captured on a workshop that I did with a couple of friends, one who lives in South Africa and one who used to live there, named Pierre Steenberg and Henning de Beer. And we ran a Zimbabwe-Botswana workshop. And we started in Zimbabwe because we wanted to photograph Victoria Falls for a couple of days. And then the rest of the workshop moved to Botswana, and it was all safari. So I noticed the night before, we had come back after 2 sunset shoots out at Victoria Falls to our safari camp. And I noticed the night before that right after the sunset, these darn elephants would lumber their way through this forest back here, and they would want to get up to this watering hole. And I told everybody, hey, when we got back from the second sunset, everybody was hungry, wanted to go get something to eat, go to the bar. That, you know, it's a long day. Workshops are long days. And I said, hey guys, I think we have a real chance at a great photo adventure if you all came out on the back deck. Well, nobody showed up. So I went out with my 100 to 400 and extended. I think I put a 2x converter on it, if I recall. So let me see if it picked up. Yeah, it picked up at f8. Well, I was at 12,800, and this was a Sony 9, Sony A9, excuse me. And that's a 24 meg camera. Okay, so it was 12,400. But the key here is look at that shutter speed. Now, here's the thing, I mentioned this before on one of the night shots. I was talking about this, I think on the Neowise shot. If you don't get the exposure correct, there's no sense in processing the picture because noise is going to get too crazy, right? Well, always tuck it in the back of your mind that these engineers are working hard. As good as DeepPRIME is now, they're going to come out with something better in another year. I'll guarantee you. It's you know, self-preservation for the engineers, but they're learning as we're going. So the reason I chose 1/40th of a second, and I was on a tripod, is I knew through all my years of shooting sports, I didn't want to go any lower than that, or I would really risk getting motion in these elephants. And I just love the flow of these elephants. You got the two coming here to drink, and then the whole herd, and then this beautiful little line of dust that goes up. The lighting on this, the sun had already well set, was just two huge incandescent lights that were on the back of the photo safari building. That's all that's lighting them. So I'm going to come over here to my histogram. You can see it's actually a pretty good histogram. A lot of shadow data, right? Let's turn on the shadow warnings. And just a little clipping. You can barely see it in these trees and the elephants, so that's good. Let's turn on the highlight clipping, because to my eye, it kind of looks like maybe this pond's blowing out, but you can see I've got wiggle room in there. So I think my first move on this, and I'm really going to fly by the seat of my pants. I've processed this image over and over and over, and I'm actually to the point now with DeepPRIME. Aha, let me go back in. Let me hit DeepPRIME. Okay, and now we're going to come back over here. I'm going to open up the exposure just a tad, and now I'm watching my highlights. I still have some room, so there's enough detail in those highlights, but I think where I can get some back is in the shadows. And now we're starting to open up that picture. You can see I pulled off the blacks, so let's pull down our blacks a little. You gotta have you gotta have a little bit of blacks, and you can see it showing up here. This was taught to me by the top printers at Bay PhotoLab. It's called DMAX, maximum density in your blacks. You must every picture have it, but you don't want to have blown highlights unless they're a specular highlight or stars, something like that. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I would probably tone that down, and I think the best way I would go about doing this is go back into Nik. And what I'm going to do, the reason I'm going in here is we're going to see if we can improve upon this and take the brightness down on this water a little bit. So I want to get over here in just regular single frame mode, and let's go up and take a control point. And I just want to take it down a little, just so it's not such an eye grab. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to drop one more on the corner again, because I don't want the bright right on the corner. And this one I will take down a little bit more. Okay, maybe about right. I think we could even go a little bit more. Don't be afraid to go too much. Okay, and what it's doing, it really, because the control point's now on the bush. Let me drop one more control point in there and make sure I got it right on this water there. And really shrink that down. And now we'll just work right on the water. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Wow. So now what I've done is kind of naturally push the eye off this corner. Let's do a split view. Okay, there's after, there's before. I may have I may want to back this one off just a hair, maybe open it up. It's a little, this is the thing, when you're trying to build in I call these transitions, you don't want to draw attention to it. You know they're there, but you don't want your audience to know that you are there. Now I come across, and yeah, that's looking pretty cool. I think the only other thing I might do is even just slightly bump the contrast. I'm working right on the edge with this file, but I've really gotten to a point where I think I can get this thing good enough now and send it out to print. I didn't feel confident before until DeepPRIME came out that I could do that. So let's put it in split view, okay? And you can see where we worked our way through. And I want to save this out, and we'll wrap up. I just want to get into full screen view here, show you guys. Okay, and let's see if this will work. Okay. No, it's not showing it as much as I wanted, but if we click back to the original raw file and we reset it, that's what I started with. That's what I was trying to get back to. And we went from that, which was, not a super underexposed shot, as you can tell by the histogram. I knew I had the data, but at 12,500 ISO on a 5-year-old camera, look at that. I can tell you that when this goes to print, I would probably, the last thing I'd do is I'd clone out this little guy right here, and I'd take the water down right along this edge here. I could go back into Viveza and put some control points. I think this one is fine up here because it's inside the borders of the picture. Might take down that little guy. It's really the little things on the edges of your pictures. Be very careful not to have super brights because the eye is going to be tugged down in here, and we want to work the eye up in here. I'm not a big fan of doing vignettes. If I do it, I work corners independently of one another. I just don't slap a 4-corner vignette on there. So I think, Lori, my presentation part is over, and okay. I'd be more than happy to take some questions here.
Okay, we do have a couple questions. We'll start off with Paul, who's asking, why shoot chrome instead of negative?
Oh, good question, Paul. Back in the day, when I worked for Sports Illustrated in the late 80s and the early 90s, and even when I worked with the San Jose Sharks, the majority of stuff they wanted to go to print was positives, because at Sports Illustrated, like I would shoot a football game on a Sunday afternoon, and I would have to get to the airport. Let's say I was in San Francisco, I'd run the film to the airport, and we had these special drop bags. The code name was, oh gosh, was it Red Fox? It was something Fox, and they were big red envelopes. And there was a United flight that would go out of San Francisco at 8 o'clock, and it would land at Kennedy, I think at 6 in the morning, something like that. And they would have a runner pick up the film. It would go to the Time Life building because the magazine closed around noontime on Monday afternoons. The editor would do the sort. The editor would pick the pics she thought that were the best. And then they would go into this big movie theater complex. I never saw it. And just imagine you being in a theater, and it was all the main editors were in there, and they would look at the selects and they go, that's the opener, is that a cover shot, et cetera, et cetera. And, or here was the thing, and it's true to this day, if you'd ever got a call from the magazine, you knew you did a great job. And I knew after 10 a.m. California time, if I didn't get a call, I did a great job. The only time they're going to call you is when they thought you screwed it up or you didn't get a picture. You were, where was this touchdown? How come you didn't get this touchdown? Something like that. But it was mainly because magazines worked with chrome film. That's why.
Good answer. Okay. Andrea is asking, are you letting the camera decide the ISO, example, auto ISO, or are you setting it manually for your?
That's another great question. Here's my answer. 80% of the time, yes. I am going into auto ISO. I think it's that good. I've actually gone into where I am now recording 4K video. Getty has come to me and said, look, you're out there doing all these great landscape shots. Can you run some 4K stuff? Well, that was easier asked than done. I went on a 2-month mission of figuring out how I was going to adapt everything and do it. And what I find is for example, I was just in Yosemite Saturday, and 20 minutes before sunset, we had a full moon rising right behind Half Dome. And this was a friend of mine, Gary Hart. Gary, if you're out there listening, I'll give you all the props for it. He figured it out and invited about 5 or 6 of us photographers up. And I was running 4K and doing my stills, and I wanted to start down in Yosemite Valley and do a upwards pan. So if you're starting in the valley, that's all in shade 20 minutes before sunset, and all the pretty lights up on El Capitan and Half Dome and Clouds Rest, all the monoliths. And so as I panned up, I had to have that camera adjusted. The only way I could do that was to put it in auto ISO. But if I was running a straight shot out on the monoliths where the light wasn't going to move, I call it a static shot, I would lock into an ISO. So the answer is about 80% of the time. I'll tell you in still photography where it really comes in handy. If you're shooting flowers on a windy day and the light's changing on you, and I'm an edge of the day shooter, that's when I like working, when the lights, I'm out there a half hour before sunset to a half hour after sunset, and the same with sunrise. And if there's wind blowing, boy, it can drive you drive you to drink trying to photograph flowers. You go into auto ISO because at that point, your limiting factor becomes your shutter speed. And now I can crank in maybe 1/250th of a second at whatever aperture I want. Maybe I need f8 or 5.6 to make the scene work. And then I just let the camera go ahead and pick the ISO. And it's really taken a lot of frustration off my shoulders on doing shots like that. So that's a really good question.
Okay, this next question is, and I'll kind of start it out, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of jump in for a second. There are a lot of people asking if there's a reason for not using local adjustment tools in PhotoLab instead of Viveza. And so I've been explaining to folks, especially for those of us who've used the Nik Collection for many years, Viveza is super easy to use with that control point because you've got, the basic adjustments. PhotoLab does have that control point capability. It's just a little bit different. So you definitely could use both. So
yeah. And I'll say, Lori, I'm an old dog who goes by the philosophy of if it works, stick with it. And I have worked with the local adjustments inside of PhotoLab, and they're fantastic. But I just, I've been with, well, we were talking the other day, 14 years ago or so when Viveza first started, and you learn a software. And if there's not a reason to go away from it, you don't. You really, guys, have to become so familiar with your software. Don't try to learn everything about a software program. It'll drive you batty. I remember back in the day when I was trying to learn Photoshop, and I started on version 2 of Photoshop. That's how long I've been with it. And there were these thick Bibles. Lori, I know you remember this. And I would sit there and try to read those things cover to cover, and you don't learn a thing. You learn a thing by maybe you just focus in on one tool up here. You want to learn DxO Smart Lighting. What is it? What does uniform and spot weighted mean? What does mode mean here? You learn that, and you work at it in increments. To try to go in and learn any software program, top to bottom, all in one sitting, you can't do it. I mean, maybe some of you are out there are brilliant and you can. I can't do it. And I've been at this stuff 40 plus years. So just work it in increments. And if you know where that tool resides to get the correction you're looking for, then you're good. I mean, probably the only other thing I would do at this elephant shot is I'd eventually run a dodging tool over this to lighten this up, and I would add some warmth in there. And that would be it. The rest of the shot is there because of DeepPRIME. It wasn't there before. Prime did a great job, believe me. DeepPRIME just took this picture to a whole new level where I can print it big and feel very confident about it. So that's why, it's just, I think you feel comfortable with something, you stick with it.
Good answer again. Okay, I think we're going to wrap this up. Don, this has been a fantastic presentation. Thanks everybody for joining us. Don, thank you so much for this presentation. And
thanks for asking me to do this, Lori. And if I didn't watch it too bad, maybe I can come back one of these days.
That would be great. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.